The ice never softened on Gethen. Wind shrieked over the frozen plains, carving the surface into white dunes that shifted and whispered like ancient spirits. In the heart of this cold world, a lone figure trudged forward, wrapped in thick furs and silence. The pale sky held no sun, only a dull, hovering light that cast long, mournful shadows. Ryn Vek, emissary of the Ecumen, pressed on. His breath steamed through the wool scarf tied around his face, his every step forward an act of defiance against the cold. He was not Gethenian. His bones ached with earth-bred warmth, and his blood did not flow with the patience of natives. He had arrived in the city of Irhenrang 2 cycles ago, tasked with a mission older than memory, to invite this isolated world into the vast union of planets and minds known as the Ecumen. But what he had found here was not merely political resistance. It was a different way of being, a world where gender was not fixed, where humanity had taken a divergent path, and where every breath was a lesson in humility. The journey had begun in comfort, velvet rooms, cautious receptions, and sterile diplomacy. But it had unraveled like thread from a worn sleeve when the Sarf, the secret police of Karhide, accused Ryn of espionage. He had been imprisoned, interrogated, and, eventually, released into exile through the quiet intercession of one person, Estraven. Estraven was a puzzle Ryn never quite solved. The former Prime Minister of Karhide had risked everything to protect him, position, safety, even identity. In a world where people flowed between male and female states depending on the moon and the cycle, Estraven had embodied an impossible grace. Neither man nor woman. Both. Neither. Ryn had struggled to comprehend, but in the end, it wasn't understanding that mattered. It was trust. Together, they crossed the Gobrin ice. Weeks of silence broken only by whispers and wind. They slept huddled in the tent, shared rations, learned each other's rhythms. At first, Ryn had kept a careful distance, burdened by the invisible weight of his own assumptions. But the ice has a way of stripping away pretense. On that vast white desert, there were no titles, no nations, no genders, only two beings depending on each other for survival. It was during the 12th day, as they rationed the last of the dried churn-beast meat, that Ryn noticed how Estraven no longer looked alien. The angular face, once so different, had become familiar. The cadence of their voice, sometimes sharp, sometimes soft, no longer needed interpretation. Ryn spoke in his own tongue, and Estraven replied in kind, as if language itself had melted in the fire between them. One night, with the wind keening outside the tent, Estraven spoke of hearths left behind, of a brother lost to the storms, of a lover who could not return from Kemer. Ryn listened. He wanted to reach out but didn't know how, so he offered only silence and presence. And in return, Estraven touched his hand, briefly, almost reverently. "You are strange, envoy," they said, "but not alone." It had been the most human thing Ryn had heard since arriving on Gethen. Now, many cycles later, Ryn stood in the courtyard of the city of Missionary, capital of Guin, the rival nation to Karhide. Snow fell softly, muffling the clang of distant bells. He had succeeded in part. The councils were debating the proposal to join the Ecumen. Scientists pored over the ensemble, that strange device that allowed instant communication across light years. Some called it magic, others heresy. But the crack had formed in the ice of their skepticism, and through it, a future might emerge. But the cost had been high. Estraven did not survive the crossing. On the 34th day, with the outpost finally in sight, they had been spotted by border guards. Ryn had waved the Ecumen seal, called out in 3 languages. But the guards had orders.
Gethenians feared spies more than ghosts. And Estraven, who had once been a Karhidish traitor in their eyes, became a target. Before Ryn could stop them, a bolt pierced Estraven's chest, and they fell into the snow, red spilling across white. Ryn had held their hand until the light in Estraven's eyes dimmed. There had been no final words. Just breath. And stillness. The officials had apologized. Mistakes, misunderstandings. Ryn had nodded, accepted their grief. But a part of him had frozen on the ice that day, never to thaw again. He now lived among people who wore their politics like armor, who mistrusted every kindness, who viewed his presence as both miracle and threat. He gave lectures. He answered questions. He waited for approval from a people who measured time in generations. And every evening, he returned to the small room assigned to him in the embassy, where he would light the brazier, hold the locket Estraven had left behind, and whisper their name like a prayer. In his dreams, the ice stretched on forever, and Estraven walked beside him, always out of reach. Then, one evening, as Ryn reviewed the latest reports, a soft knock sounded at his door. A young Gethenian entered, carrying a sealed scroll. "The council has voted," they said, offering it with a slight bow. Ryn broke the seal with numb fingers. His eyes skimmed the delicate ink, then read it again, slower. They had agreed. Or Guin would open dialogue with the ecumen. An envoy would be sent to Karhide to foster shared governance. The long-isolated planet of Gethen would, at last, take its first step into the collective web of interstellar humanity. Ryn sat back, the scroll trembling in his hands. The room was quiet, save for the crackle of the brazier. He closed his eyes. The face of Estraven rose before him, not in death, but in life. Smiling that enigmatic smile. Fierce and tender. "You did it," he whispered. "We did it." But victory was not sweet. It was solemn. Heavy. Like snow on the soul. In the days that followed, messengers arrived from Karhide. Treaties were drafted, translated, debated. Ryn was asked to speak before both governments. He wore the robes of the ecumen and stood beneath flags stitched in silver and black. He spoke of unity, of kinship across stars, of the strength found in difference. And he spoke of Estraven. Their courage. Their sacrifice. Their vision. He told their story not as a myth, but as truth. Not as a footnote, but as foundation. The crowds listened in silence. And when he finished, many bowed their heads, not to him, but to the memory of the one who had walked across the ice. Years passed. The first ecumen ships landed in Erhenrang, sleek vessels of metal and light. Children ran through the streets chasing their reflections in mirrored hulls. New words entered the Gethenian tongue, words like alliance, orbit, kinship. Some resisted the changes. Others embraced them. Ryn remained. He grew older in body, but younger in soul. He walked the cities, learned the customs, sat by hearthfires and listened to songs sung in the winter dark. He never returned to Earth. This was his home now. This world of cold and fire, of silence and meaning. On the anniversary of Estraven's death, Ryn made a pilgrimage to the ice. He wore no armor, no badge of office. Just furs and boots, and the memory of a friend who had taught him the meaning of humanity. At the edge of the plain, where the wind still howled and the snow danced like ghosts, he knelt. He placed a stone on the cairn he had built long ago, now half buried by the years. "I still don't understand everything," he said softly, voice nearly lost to the wind. "But I know this, you were the bravest person I ever knew." The ice said nothing. But as he turned to leave, the wind shifted, gentle now. Almost warm. And Ryn Vek smiled. Because even on Gethen, even in the coldest heart of darkness, there was light.